Hello, everyone, and welcome to the True Crime with Caitlyn podcast. I'm your host, Caitlyn, and before we get into today's episode, I just want to ask if you'll bear with how I sound today. I'm recovering from a cold. I don't know who manages to catch a cold during a heat wave, but apparently I do. So I'm sounding a little bit croaky and dry, but if you can bear with us through this episode, I would appreciate it because I am more than ready to tell you all about today's case. Today, I am going to tell you all about a modern day serial killer. A serial killer who was active in 2025. Now, whenever I think of serial killers, I think of the 70s and the 80s. I think of the Zodiac and the Night Stalker. I don't think about someone walking around in the 2020s committing serial murders. And that is why I wanted to tell you all about today's case. Today I'm going to tell you about a man who preyed on others in vulnerable, difficult positions in their life, believing that they wouldn't be missed. He would lure these men to his remote cabin, viciously kill them, and then did the unthinkable to their bodies. Had he not have been caught, I wholeheartedly believe that he would have went on to kill his way across Cornwall. This is the case of serial killer James Desborough. 39-year-old James Desborough was a father of one who was also a fully qualified civil engineer living in Cornwall. At the start of 2025, James moved into Sandy Lodge. Sandy Lodge is a HMO-type multiple occupancy residence house, which is a place that housed people who were in vulnerable positions, mostly people who were experiencing homelessness and were addicted to drugs and or alcohol. All of these things being things that applied to James. Before arriving here, he was spiraling out of control. He would go into these drug and alcohol-fueled rages. On one occasion, he stole a box of eggs from a nearby shop, marched up to the town hall in Truro, and then began egging it, basically asking for trouble. He was unhappy and angry with the direction that his life was going in. He had lost his job, lost his family, his home, and was dependent on drugs and alcohol. And he was just looking for someone or something to take this frustration out on. In his spare time, James enjoyed binge watching the TV series Dexter, a show which follows a vigilante serial killer, which I don't feel like I need to describe too much because I think every man and his dog has watched Dexter, although I personally couldn't get into it. James, however, loved it. He was absolutely obsessed with the show and would even say that he particularly enjoyed the episodes which depicted dismemberment. During his time at Sandy Lodge, James would form a friendship with a man named Claudio Aquilino. Claudio was described as having a troubled life. He was born in March 1968, and for many of his 57 years, he struggled with addiction. He came from a very large, loving Italian family. He spoke to his mum Anna, who still lived in Italy every single day, but as drugs often do, they can isolate you from your family, your true friends, the people who genuinely love and care about you. And Claudio was no different. He was someone who could be very easily manipulated and taken advantage of. When he had his own little home, he would be a victim of cocoon by these big and intimidating drug dealers. They would essentially take over Claudio's home to do whatever illegal things they were up to. They would swander in whenever they wanted without his permission, rip Claudio's phone out of his hands, and would actually force him to participate in whatever it was that they were doing, which he didn't want to do. In 2022, he actually reported this to the police. This situation got so bad for Claudio that he ended up either giving up or leaving or being kicked out of his home, and he decided that for him, living on the streets, sleeping in a tent and enduring racial abuse was actually the safer and better option for him. This is before he was given the opportunity to have accommodation within Sandy Lodge. Despite his difficulties, Claudio was described as a man who was very intelligent. He was a creative, talented artist. He was a brilliant chef, known how to cook up the most delicious meals, and was known to always have a smile on his face. In April 2025, both James and Claudio were removed from Sandy Lodge. They had been kicked out. Claudio had nowhere to go, but James actually did. After the passing of his granddad, he had inherited a plot of land inside of Paramore Woods, nearby the village of Sticker in Cornwall, on the isolated private land tucked away within the dense trees. James had built himself a bit of a ramshackle cabin where he would often visit and go to, but he couldn't legally live there because of some sort of planning permission thing with the council. So, after getting kicked out of Sandy Lodge, James offered Claudio a roof over his head, offering Claudio to come and stay with him in the cabin for however long he needed, and literally, having nowhere else to go and no other option available to him, Claudio accepted. During their time at the cabin together, James, who had formed a bond and I guess a sense of trust with Claudio, expressed to him that he had a desire, a compulsion to kill, and that he wanted Claudio to do it with him. James actually already had this fully thought out plan. He was going to break into an abandoned hotel, attack someone using his own personal tools, which included a crowbar and an axe. He wanted to commit a very vicious murder. In so many cases that I research into, I oftentimes see instances of troubling behaviour like this, where the witness brushes it off and nothing is really done. In this case though, that wasn't the case. Claudio was so genuinely shaken and worried by what James had asked of him, what James wanted to get him tangled up in, so much so that Claudio actually contacted the police, telling them this, and he described James as reckless and off his head. This is part of that 999 call, which was made on the 17th of April, 2025.
Police emergency?
Yeah, hi, listen, I'm trying to avoid a crime that's going to be committed. He's got to get his junior and break into an abandoned hotel. He's gone to get his tools, an axe and a crowbar. And in Truro he's wanted, that's what he said. So he's really, really off his head. He doesn't care, so he's really going to be reckless. No, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to really keep him out of trouble, but what I should do is just avoid and just go and not meet him. But I don't know, I just trying to be a good citizen now.
Within the call, Claudio expresses that James is wanting to commit this crime that he wants absolutely no involvement in. He recognises that really he should distance himself away from James and get away from him, but he described himself as a good citizen, not wanting to leave James. I personally wonder if Claudio staying with James was in part due to a power imbalance. James was offering Claudio a secure place to live inside of that cabin. If Claudio left, where did he have to go? He had nowhere else. Maybe because of this, Claudio felt like he couldn't leave. The day after contacting the police, so this is now the 18th of April 2025, Claudio and James both headed into town, going to a local Wetherspoons, where they spent some time knocking back a couple of drinks with another man. After a few hours, the two men get up and leave together, presumably heading towards the cabin. They're captured walking away together on CCTV And this is the final footage of Claudio Aquilino alive. Upon their return to James Desborough's cabin, situated in the Paramore Woods, we don't know exactly what happened between him and Claudio Aquilino. However, James would use extreme violence towards him, which resulted in the death of Claudio. James had finally enacted on something that he had been wanting to do for a very long time, committing his first murder. Following this, he went through great efforts to try and conceal what he had done by disposing of Claudio's body, starting off by dismembering him, removing his limbs from his torso. Court records stated that some of Claudio's remains were placed into a caravan which was then set on fire, incinerating what was inside, and that James had, quote, tipped what was left into a nearby stream. James raided through Claudio's wallet and began helping himself to Claudio's money, stealing from the man that he had just viciously murdered. James would go back into town and he went from hole in the wall to hole in the wall, withdrawing cash after cash, and even transferred himself some of Claudio's money, presumably via online banking. We know that he did have access to Claudio's phone, as he would go on to send messages from it, pretending to be Claudio so that people who were texting him would be none the wiser. They would have no reason to believe that anything had happened to Claudio. Murdering him wouldn't be enough for James though, and just a fortnight after the murder of Claudio, James was gearing up to strike again. 43-year-old Daniel Coleman, born in September of 1981, was another man that James had met through Sandy Lodge. Daniel had a very difficult upbringing and survived an awful traumatic event. When he was just 13 years old, Daniel was actually kidnapped, and at some point during his captivity, he was stabbed. He survived this life-altering ordeal. However, from then, he suffered greatly with PTSD. Daniel developed a dependency on alcohol, and potentially as a result of this addiction, he developed a medical issue called cirrhosis. This is a chronic liver disease which can make the cells become inflamed, can thicken the tissue, scar the liver, and can be very uncomfortable for the person who has it. Daniel Coleman was also a girl dad. He had one daughter named Sapphire, who described him as a wonderful father, and other people would say similar things, saying that Daniel was a very kind, caring, and loving person. On the 3rd of June, Daniel and James were together, going on a bar crawl all through Falmouth. One of the pubs or bars that they visited actually had some of the clearest CCTV footage that I have ever seen, and it captured the men walking in and up to the bar. James orders drinks and Daniel is just sort of stood off beside him. He's very quiet and not really saying anything while James is overpowering the conversation and blabbering on. Here is a clip of that audio.
Yeah, well, preferably rattler. Yeah, rattler? Yeah, 2 arms rattler, please. Oh, hang on, they're a five or a pint. Do you want a pint or no? 2 hours, yeah? No, yeah, I'm for a five, I'm fine, you can have half. Yeah, I'll have a pint, please, yeah. So we've still got 1, 2, 6 pubs left.
Do you hot bar by chance?
Yeah. Well, Falmouth's the best place, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the last place in Cornwall you can actually go on the bar.
They pay all together.
The men continued their bar crawl well into the evening, and by the end of the day, they retired back to the cabin, where Daniel would never be seen again. Just like with Claudio, we don't know the full events of what actually happened to Daniel, but James would murder him with extreme forceful violence. The 4th of July, so a day after their bar crawl, James takes Daniel's bank card and takes himself to a nearby hardware shop where he buys an array of suspicious items. This includes knives, a hacksaw, firelighter, and an axe, all items that he would go on to use to dismember Daniel. That same day, James orders a taxi to a local garage where he goes inside, buys himself one of those plastic jerry can things, fills that up with fuel, once again paying for that on Daniel's card, and then returns back to the cabin. Side note, but when I was researching this, I was honestly trying to think about what James's plan was with what he was doing, because he is going out there with a neck like a giraffe, spending on both of these men's cards in areas where there's CCTV. So should anyone come looking for the men, they would be able to tell that it was James using the bank cards. He's not doing anything to try and conceal that he is spending their money. And like I said, even with Claudio, he was physically transferring himself some money. Like I said right at the beginning of this episode, James targeted these men because he falsely believed that no one would come looking for them. So was that enough to make him think that he was so secure that he could just go out and about spending on these cards? Or was this something that he just didn't even think about? So, after buying the jerry can and the petrol, James returns to the cabin, and over the next several hours, he begins the cover-up of Daniel's body, dismembering him, removing his arms and legs from his torso, mutilating and removing his genitals, and then decapitating him. Using the petrol that he bought, he set some of Daniel's remains alight, and once they were in what was described as a charred condition, he transported them down a sort of makeshift hidden path where he then buried them. Come early June, both the families of Claudio and Daniel were becoming very concerned about their disappearances. Anna, Claudio's mother back in Italy, almost immediately recognised that something was wrong when she wasn't getting her daily phone calls from her son. And Claudio would ring his mum every single day. And I'm not saying that this is the reason why, but Anna would often send her son money. So going from talking every day and sending him a couple of quid here and there to absolutely nothing, it was ringing all of the alarm bells. Claudio was reported missing to the police, and I imagine that James became aware of this because the police would have likely spoken to him. He was a resident of Sandy Lodge at the same time as Claudio, and they appeared to be friendly. When James realised that there was an effort to try and locate Claudio, he began to try and mislead and deceive the police. Using Claudio's bank card, James bought a one-way ticket from Cornwall over to London to make it look like Claudio had upped and left of his own accord. And James, he wasn't going to let a day trip to London go to waste, so he actually jumped on the train using the ticket that he had bought, spent a couple of hours there before returning back to Cornwall. He would buy his return ticket in cash, so it was untraceable. Anyone who was looking into Claudio would only see that one-way ticket to London. When Daniel Coleman's family began questioning his disappearance and officially reported him missing on the 17th of June, James did a very similar thing. He booked Daniel a seat on a coach heading to Exeter. Concern was now rapidly growing with the police because here were at least two vulnerable men who were disappeared after spending a period of time at Sandy Lodge. Another link between the men was James Desborough. When the detectives started combing through Claudio's bank records, they could see that his card was consistently being used. Someone was spending all of his benefit money and rinsing his account. And through the CCTV, like I mentioned before, they saw clear as day exactly who was doing this. It was James Desborough. After discovering this, the police wanted to speak to him more closely, because why and how does he have the bank card of a missing man and he's going about using it as if it's his own? It was actually initially suspected that this was a case of fraud, and so police arrived at the cabin to arrest James. During the arrest, James asks the officer if he can go back inside the cabin to retrieve some boxer shorts, and then he makes a comment saying that he had been broken into while he was away and that the cabin had basically been ransacked. I personally don't believe that for a single second. I think that his cabin was in such a messy, disorganized, ransacked state because there was a struggle between him and either Claudio and or Daniel while he was murdering them.
I'm a little bit confused to what's on here,
Yeah.
That's all right, mate. We're here because we've got there's an issue ongoing at the minute, and we just need to have a chat.
James, just listen to me for the minute, mate. All right. So the time is 18:06, and you're under arrest on suspicion of fraud.
Do you reckon I can get some clothes? Because I've got no boxer shorts on.
Yeah, of course.
I got broken into when I was away. I had all my stuff, all my truck smashed up in it.
Got to come in with you, all right, mate? But right, what do you need?
Well, I'd like to put them shorts on.
You want to put those shorts on? Yeah, I think we can sort out. Are you going to stay nice and calm with us, mate?
Oh, yeah. Sweet, yeah. What's your last name, James? Desborough, D-E-S-B-O-R-O-U-G-H.
James wasn't held in custody for very long until he was eventually released after a search had been conducted within his cabin, which he then returned to. When he was sat in that cell, he probably had a heavy feeling in his gut for every agonising hour, minute and second, because he knew that the police were searching his cabin. He obviously knew exactly what he was doing and maybe thought that the police were surely going to find something. So when he got released, James was probably overcome with a wave of relief. He probably couldn't believe it and thought that he had gotten away with it. His freedom was short-lived, however, as just 5 days after he was released, he was arrested once again. Only this time, it wasn't under suspicion of fraud. This time, he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Hey mate, you alright?
James?
Yeah.
You got a light, James? You alright? You alright, just come in a minute, mate?
Yeah, alright. I've got head torch.
No, that's alright, we'll leave it as we are. Oh, there you go, no close. James, the time is 21:35, alright? At this moment in time, we're arrested on suspicion of murder. Right. Okay, you do not have to say anything. 1 second.
Yeah, mate, we'll
sort. Yeah. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm you if you don't. Do not mention my questions. Something later on. Anything you do say may be given evidence. All right. Necessity for your arrest for a prompt and threatened investigation. All right. And for protect a vulnerable person.
All right. Can you put?
Well, Jen. One sec. Let me just sort the cuffs, and then we will sort everything slow time, mate.
Broke up.
All right. Yeah, no worries.
If you can get that squared away, mate. All right.
It rains.
It wasn't raining just now.
Crime scene investigators, police, detectives, everyone descended on James's land within Paramore Woods, and they spent a whopping 5 months combing through it, leaving not a single stone unturned. During this search, they would discover just under 2,000 pieces of charred bone fragments. These were found within a stream and were identified as belonging to Claudio Aquilino. In a shallow grave, they found the dismembered, charred remains of Daniel Coleman. And actually above this grave, there was this really big tree, and hanging from one of the branches was an axe which was soaked in blood. Flesh would also be recovered from one of the tree branches, and when that was examined, it was determined to have been Claudio's. Back at the cabin, investigators made some chilling discoveries. There was a lot of handwritten stuff found inside of there, and on one bit of paper, James had written, scribbled down, quote, "I know I'm a killer." On another, they found a hit list that James had written up, and I think he titled it as his hostiles list. It had tons of different names of people on that James didn't like, and Daniel's name wasn't just on that list, but beside it, James had marked it with crosses, almost like he was ticking off a task on his to-do list. Also discovered was a map which James had titled his kill zone, and it's sort of hard to describe it, but it's just like lots of circles. I'll make sure to have a picture over on the Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn so you can see it. But on different points of each of the circles, he's labelled different places. So right at the centre is the woods, his cabin. Then he's labelled somewhere London, labelled somewhere Plymouth, and he's even got a label for Benidorm. Under the outside decking of his cabin, personal belongings of Claudio and Daniel were recovered. This included wallets, bank cards, gym cards, and a watch. The evidence that police were stacking up against James was overwhelming, and they likely felt relieved to have such a ruthless, dangerous man off of the streets where he couldn't hurt anyone else. But that wasn't going to stop James Desborough from acting upon his compulsion. Being in prison wasn't going to stop him from killing. After being arrested under suspicion of murder, James Desborough was being held at HMP Exeter. At some point, while awaiting his trial for his charges, him being charged with 2 murders, he was given a new cellmate. This was a 65-year-old man named Stephen Kempster, who was described as, quote, old, unwell and frail. Stephen had a medical condition which made his breathing very heavy, but it also meant that he snored like a foghorn when he was asleep, but it wasn't something that he could help or had any sort of control over. The snoring disturbed James's sleep and he immediately applied for a transfer, but it wasn't immediately granted. I don't really know how transfers work between cells in prisons. James then decided he was going to try and threaten Stephen to see if that would make him stop. He told Stephen that if he didn't stop snoring, he would kill him. And he did. Just 3 days after being put together, James was lay in his bed in the dead of night, listening to Stephen's snores. He got up, wrapped his big hands around Stephen's throat, and then squeezed the life out of him, strangling him to death. After this, James casually went for a shower, and I was under the impression that the cells would be locked overnight, but apparently not here because he went for a casual shower at daft o'clock in the morning. He then went back to his cell and then went to sleep as if nothing had happened. Early the next morning, he alerted a prison officer, saying that Stephen had fallen out of bed and wasn't waking up, but his lies were like glass. He would shortly be arrested under suspicion of yet another murder, officially making him a serial killer.
Okay, James.
Yeah, alright.
Yeah, James, I'm a police officer. The time is 17:12, and at this time you are under arrest on suspicion of murder.
Alright.
Okay, you do not have to say anything.
Yeah.
Harm your defence. If you do not mention one question, something should later alarm the court.
Can you take
Anything you do say may be given evidence. Just let me explain the circumstances of your arrest. This morning, your cellmate was found deceased in a cell, pronounced deceased by paramedics. Okay, and you were the only one to be in that cell.
Yeah.
Okay, the necessity of your arrest is to conduct a prompt and effective investigation and to protect vulnerable people from harm.
You finished?
Yes.
Can I go for a pen?
Just hold on a second, we're going to need to bag your hands up for forensic opportunities, okay?
Yeah.
He would be tried for the murder of Stephen Kempster first in March of 2026, where he was found guilty and handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years to serve. The trial for the double murder of Claudio Aquilino and Daniel Coleman was held at Winchester Crown Court, where James denied that he murdered the men, but admitted, pleading guilty, to preventing lawful burial, and he tried to say that he only did this because he was high on ketamine. James's story was that both of the men just so happened to die at his property. Claudio allegedly taking his own life, and he didn't have an excuse for Daniel. He said Daniel just died. Once again, he wasn't believed by a jury and was convicted of both murders. Taking into account his sheer brutality, his unbotheredness for human life, the judge in this case handed James a sentence of a whole life order. This meaning that he will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. Following the arrest and conviction of James Desborough, Devon and Cornwall police have begun reinvestigating several other unexplained deaths. In some cases in particular, have similar elements to the case of Claudio and Daniel. They are looking into 4 other people, 2 men and 2 women, whom had been residents at Sandy Lodge at the same time as James, all of whom had died under potentially suspicious circumstances. Could James be involved in these cases? Could he be the reason why so many other men have gone missing in Cornwall? Did he really murder 3 people? Or is he responsible for many more deaths? Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. If you can leave me a 5-star review wherever you're watching, that would really help me out. You can find photos over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.